This is something new. I attended a virtual lean conference last week, and they did some icebreaker questions at the beginning, and I thought it was kind of fun just using the chat box. So I thought I would do this in the same way. Now, what I want everybody to do is you have to make sure that you're sending this message to all panelists. So make sure that it's checked all panelists. And then when I ask the question, hold off to hit enter, type in your answer, but don't hit enter until I say to do so, because otherwise it'll skew the answers a little bit maybe for people that are holding off. We're going to all send our answers into the chat box at the same time. So the question that I have is, the first question is, what is your dream vacation spot? It could be somewhere where you have been before, or maybe you've never been there before, but you just really would love to go vacation there. Don't put it in the chat box yet, but just type it in. Make sure that you have all panelists and all attendees checked so that it goes to everyone, not just the panelists. And we're going to send your answer here in just a minute. What is your dream vacation spot? So go ahead and type that in, and we're going to send it in 1, 2, 3. So everybody go ahead and send that. And let's watch the chat box. Let's see what happens. All right, we have Dubai, Italy, Hawaii, Maldives. Oh, yeah. There we go. Lake Como, some good spots. Mexico, good vacation spots. Miami, I love Miami. Argentina, Rome, my hometown, Indiana. Hey, that's good. South France. Okay, good. All right, next question. Last question as we're welcoming everybody. If you're just logging on, we're just doing some quick icebreaker questions with the chat box. Please make sure that you send your question to all panelists and all attendees. I still see there's quite a few people that are sending messages just to the panelists. So we want to make sure that everybody can see your answers. Make sure you check all panelists and all attendees. You want to send it to everyone. So this next question, you're going to type it in, and when I say go, you're going to go ahead and hit enter on your answer. So the question is, what's your favorite food? What's your favorite food? What about you, Ernie? What's your favorite food?
I don't know, pizza, hot dogs, hamburger. I'm pretty flexible, actually.
Yeah.
Actually, right. My favorite all time, though, is chocolate.
Chocolate, of course. Looks like everybody's sending their answers. Go ahead and send your answer into the chat box there. We have lasagna, bacon, pizza, sushi, a lot of pizza. I like chicken wings myself. I go with the traditional dry rub chicken wings. Grilled salmon, sashimi, chicken, anything fresh and clean. Yeah, that's true. Good point. Grilled salmon. Good. Lots of.
I put banana peanut butter smoothie, but it really went up the line quick. So that's my afternoon when I'm home, is my banana with some protein, chocolate protein mix for the health side of things.
There you go. That's good. All right. So we're about 5 minutes in. We're going to go ahead and get started. Just like we start out every one of these webinars, Tracy and Ernie, I love to start with a poll question. And I think we have a really great poll question for all the attendees today. The question is the current COVID-19 condition going to help or hurt your culture when you return to work? So the answers are help, hurt, or maybe neither. Maybe it's not going to do anything. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll to everybody. You should have it in front of you right now. Go ahead and take a minute and answer that the best you can. Is the current COVID condition going to help or hurt your culture when you return to work? So as you're answering that, let me introduce our guest speakers for today. Tracy and Ernie Richardson are the co-owners of Teaching Lean, Inc., with over 32 years of experience in Toyota methodologies. So Tracy worked in management at the plastics department at Toyota Motor Manufacturing, Kentucky from 1988 to 1998, where you accumulated over 460 hours of class time and priceless lessons from her Japanese trainers and mentors. And then Ernie had 32 years manufacturing and human resource experience with Toyota Motor Manufacturing, which has allowed him to see the cultural dynamics from both functional areas of the company. He's certified in the Toyota Way, Toyota Business Practices, 8-step problem solving, standard work, visual management, strategy deployment, company culture, and then specializes in Toyota production system thinking. Tracy and Ernie are also co-authors of the Shingo Publication Prize-winning book, The Toyota Engagement Equation, which you see here on the screen, understanding and implementing a continuous thinking environment for any organization. And I just finished your book and absolutely loved it. So it was amazing. Hey, Tracy and Ernie, you guys should see the poll results up on the screen right now. Some interesting answers. Looks like 60% say that the current COVID situation is going to help their culture when they return to work, while 29% say that it's going to hurt and 11% say neither. Pretty interesting. So with that, I want to turn it over to you guys. Welcome.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us, Patrick. Ernie, you want to comment on our thoughts around the poll question, and then we'll dig in.
Yeah, we kind of started that poll question as kind of a thought starter, actually, to think when companies talk about culture, and a lot of companies we go to, and they talk about culture, and they say, man, it takes forever to change a culture. And if you look at what's happened with the COVID-19 activities that are going on, you can actually see a culture change fairly quickly. Now, I think some key points to that is people understand why it's important. People understand why the change is important and what effects is it for them. And so it's really a good lesson, I think, as we go into our companies, we talk about looking at trying to change a culture or cultivate a culture, I should say. And we should be looking at making sure everyone understands what's in it for them. Why should they care? And I think this has been a good example of you've seen a whole nation change the culture in a short period of time. And so I think it's a really good opportunity for companies to take advantage of that learning and being able to move into their own organizations and being able to cultivate, continue to develop the culture. So I think it's a good opportunity right now.
Absolutely. I think when you think about, the downtime some have had, and I know some of them may have shut down, but I heard especially some local companies and still being attached to Toyota a little bit, they're doing some internal things. It'd be a great time to have time to think. Toyota calls it space to think. So we'll transition into thinking, if you will, and we've kind of brought some slides up, and we even put some of our own cues to allow you to have notes if you're doing some screenshots and want to take some pictures of the slides, and so it'll allow you to kind of follow along. But E to the fourth power, so I kind of added from E cubed from the book. I added a fourth one. We talk about Kaizen and improving, and after I think about it, I'm like, we could have had E to the fourth power. And when we talk about should everybody be problem solvers, we look at every day everybody engaged, and we're empowering that in people. A lot of organizations, there's different variations of labeling. There's Six Sigma. There's a lot of things around that. And I think from the perspective of everybody's a problem solver every day, and how do we engage in that? And when we look at the kind of the footprint of an organization, I like to call it kind of the vertical and the horizontal alignment of the organization. And so it kind of makes a plus sign. I draw this up on a flip chart sometimes. And so when we look at it vertically, we can look at and it could be various things. I say it to make it rhyme, but CEO to PPO. And it means from a cascade approach, everybody has a common lens. Now, I'm going to speak from the example of Toyota and just looking at the Toyota way values, the respect for people, the teamwork, the challenge, the Kaizen continuous improvement. And when we look at problem solving and the go see, those values, how do we make those tangible, right? How do we live that, breathe that, and show that? When we talk about the values, a lot of times we'll see them up in a picture in the lobby, and beautifully framed, and but what does that mean for me as an individual? Right. So from a vertical standpoint, if I'm the president or the CEO or the owner of an organization, I want to have that common lens from a value perspective, from a true north perspective, and also a lens of problem solving. And then horizontally, when you look at all the different, some people call it silos, but all the functional areas. So, I'm just going to name a few. You look at accounting, you look at R&D, you look at human resources, manufacturing, just all the different, dependent upon your genre of industry, there's a lot of different functional areas. And, there's always what I call competing KPIs sometimes with areas. Like we'll hear, hey, engineering is more important than manufacturing. Manufacturing will say they're more important than engineering. And so if we have a common lens, a common language, kind of, as Mr. Cho said, a guiding beacon up there with the true north and our values, then it always grounds us in the sense of the directions. I know everybody's probably seen those PowerPoint slides with the arrows going all over the place. And we like to kind of harness those as we're moving towards that direction upwards. And when we look at the next bullet point there, at Toyota, when we started in '88, there wasn't a lot of things documented. Even the word lean really didn't exist in the sense of it today. We didn't know that was going to be when Jim and Dan created that in the machine that changed the world. Mm-hmm. And maybe even a little before that, but it was kind of coined then as a replication of Toyota culture. One of the funny things that our trainer said, and it probably wasn't funny at the time, but when I reflect on all this, is they said, it's not a choice, it's just our job. Mm. And last year, I think I wrote an article. I said, the job is an umbrella word for a lot of things. And I took that and I made it an acronym down there, and you can see our job is really just our behavior every day and how we align to what the company values are and make those tangible, bring that to life from that vertical and horizontal perspective. And then we can start to look at problem solving. Our trainer, the very end bullet point on this slide is looking at problem solved equals our job security. And what I mean by that is our ability to see gaps, recognize them, and make cost translations to the KPIs, meaning that our trainers down to, and some of you that have been, I saw some of you that have been in our sessions, we talked about the 1 second rule. And that was when the trainer actually made a translation to say, 1 second accumulated, if we remove 1 second of waste in our day, no matter where we are in the organization, we just happen to be on the line where we're building a vehicle, but it can be anywhere. It could be typing up through computer screens. I'm going through 10 screens I don't need to. It can be things like that. Those are your seconds. And when they made that translation to a KPI to say, if you add a second up in an 8-hour day and kind of put it in a bank, that second goes in a bank. Well, we pulse our line about every minute we make a car, and people will have to make these translations to how it fits their world. But when you add those seconds up and they go into a bank, and at the end of the day you can make 8 more cars in the same amount of time, you just sit there and you're like, wow, they asked me to save a second. My first impulse was to say, this is kind of a waste of time. Who cares about a second? But when you can make 8 more vehicles in the same amount of time, and you think about thousands of dollars of profit per vehicle, that's a lot. And that's just in one 8-hour day. And so I think folks' ability to make cost translations through problem solving, and as we get through this a little bit, we'll get a little bit deeper, that gives us that vertical and horizontal alignment to the values and our purpose. What are we doing? And this is our JOB, just our behavior every day. So Ernie, anything to add before I change?
Yeah, just think about when we talk about problem solving, it's very different than firefighting. And we have to really, we see a really strong culture in firefighting, but we have to continue to embrace how do we back up and take the time to actually solve the problems. so we can actually get ahead. We'll always have to do some firefighting. That's always have to do it, but it needs to be a small part of the day, and problem solving needs to be a bigger part of the day.
Sure. What would you say, Ernie, just a quick question. Oh, and just from a logistics standpoint too, for those of you that are listening, if you do have a question, you can drop that into the chat box. We'll do our best to answer those questions if we can, but otherwise we'll try to hit them maybe at the end of the webinar or reach out later on. But just a quick question, based on what you said, Ernie, around firefighting. I had a post out there the other day and some really good conversation around it. But what would you say for an organization that maybe the primary time for a leader is spent firefighting? You said it should be a minimal amount of time. What would you tell them would be the first step that they should take in trying to minimize the amount of firefighting that they're doing, if they do have a large portion?
Yeah, I think it's going to go into the next couple slides and talking about we got to have standards, because many times the reason we firefight is because we don't have standards and data, and therefore it forces us to do something and do something really quickly. And so as we start doing the firefighting, it can actually lead in and tell us where do we need standards and data, and should be telling us all the time, instead of, hey, we'll do this and hope it fixes it.
Right.
So it's huge into the standardization piece. So if you go into this slide, we're talking about just to kind of feed off of what you just asked, Patrick, to say, if we don't have a standard, let me back up for a second. What we ask the class when we go to them, are you managing the process or is the process managing you?
Good question.
So when we have that question, we're saying, are you always reacting or can you predict? And many times we'll hear reacting, of course, because we're in firefighting. And what we go back and talk about is, okay, let's go look at a problem, and let's start with, do you have a standard? Well, and many times we hear, well, we've always done it this way. And I always say, when I hear we've always done it this way, that's the key place to actually pull the end on, stop and go look and say, here's where we need to start with a standard.
That's right.
And we tell people a bad standard is better than no standard, because it gives us a foundation to build a better standard.
That's right. Starts to create stability for you.
Absolutely, and it starts giving us the opportunity to control the process, to understand where do we need to put our focus. And so the first question we'll always ask is, do we have a standard in place? Do we have something to look at? And then the second question is, okay, many times we'll hear we do have a standard. Now, how do you know? Let's go look at it. And when we get that how do you know part, well, we had a standard back 4 or 5 years ago, and it's in a book somewhere. And what we'll say is, well, I'm not sure that's really a standard. That's something somebody wrote at some point, and it was probably good at that time, but it's not working now, obviously. And the second key point to the standardization piece, and this is a part that we struggle with also, is everybody that's working on the process should be involved in developing the standard. They know the process better than anyone. So we go to the bottom level, the first level employee, and say, help us understand what we should be doing. And then we can start working on how does that cascade up through the organization to support the company goals and objectives. And it's really important to be able to get those folks involved, because they're the ones who really control the output of the process, right?
Right.
And then the standard really is talk about when we get into standards, they should, and many people think standards limit creativity, but actually standards are the basis for creativity. If I have a standard in place, I can now understand when I make a change how big an impact it has. If I don't have a standard in place, it's a guess how big an impact it has. I have to wait for the trailing or the lagging indicators to be able to tell me, did we actually make a difference? The next part about standards, and every discussion we have, we talk about standards, because it is so important to be able to have something that you have a baseline on. But if anybody can write a standard. We always talk about it's the easiest part about a standard is writing it. It's maintaining it long term that becomes the critical piece of it, right?
Right.
So if you don't have accountability, and I don't mean we're going to find somebody and that's not following the standard and let's go fire them. I'm talking about, do we have accountability as a company to be able to understand, are we performing according to what we should be doing, to the standard? And if there's no accountability to it, then what we say is it's really just a suggestion. It's not a standard.
Mm.
So you got to really separate the difference. If it's something I need to control that's going out of my company, I need to control it, and it needs a standard. And you look at all the critical manufacturing processes around the world, or any process that's critical, they'll always have a standard, and they'll always be audited to that standard. And that's the same thing we have to do internally with our standards. How do we ensure they're being followed to be able to control the output of the process? And that's when we know at that point we've got control of the process that's not managing us anymore.
Right.
And then we connect that standard. Once we're able to get that standard in place, now I can measure the process. I can start putting data points in, or KPIs, and to be able to see, where do I need to focus my attention? Where do I need to be able to get the right amount of resources at the right place at the right time to be able to have the biggest impact for the company?
Right.
And it really connects to the company at this point. And this is a struggle for some companies, is being able to say, how does what we do every day connect to our long-term company goals and objectives for our company? How do we have that line of sight from all the way from the operator level all the way to, as Tracy said, the CEO to the PPO? How do we have that line of sight where everybody's working from the same book?
Right.
And so standards are so hugely important for us to get some stability and stabilize, and then improve. Not improve, and never stabilize.
And Ernie, you hit on people here and a little bit on culture. There was a question that popped in, and I think you kind of answered it, but the question was, how can we build a support structure for frontline team members?
Oh, that's to me, that's the easiest part. That's what we all, as leaders, that's what we all do, right? We're developing the systems to be able to allow the team members to be successful. So we build in whatever the standardization piece, the KPI piece. We provide the environment for them to be successful, and we encourage and engage them to be able to help us solve problems. And once we're able to do that, man, the door's wide open at that point.
Sure. Yeah, good point. The other question was just on your last point around KPIs. Someone was asking, they said that they have so many KPIs in their organization. They wanted to know, what are the most impactful KPIs to align cost reduction with your KPIs?
Yeah, so what we coach people to look at is, first, what we don't need so many KPIs that they become unimportant.
Right.
So we need to measure the things that have impact to the output of our process. So if we need to control that process, we need a KPI. And sometimes here's kind of the confusion. This KPI that we're talking about, process KPI, is really for the production guy or person on the process. How do they know when to be able to make change? And then that kind of goes upward to the company goals and objectives to be able to fit in a bigger, wider range of KPIs, so we all can understand, is that process under control. The biggest mistake that many companies make is they try to track everything, and all of a sudden it becomes overwhelming and means nothing.
Right.
So what we'll tell you, go back and pick up, what are the things that you need to control out of that process? What's the one or two? In some processes, honestly, you probably don't even need a KPI. But there's almost all processes will have something critical that you need to be able to measure, to be able to see, is it performing to what it should be? If not, why?
And also, to add to what Ernie said, is looking at what does the internal customer need the process to be, and then what's the external customer. So I always say, what's the pain to the organization? You know, what's getting hit? And all KPIs, if you connect, if I have a quality issue, that's a cost. If I have a safety, an injury, something that happened, that's a cost. If I don't have a good productivity day, that's a cost. So when I talked earlier about cost translation, that's looking at productivity, that's looking at quality, that's looking at safety, that's looking at HR training and development, the people side. All of them connect to an ultimate cost for either doing or not doing something, from a leading indicator where I'm more predictive, and I think it comes up in the slides, being predictive rather than reactive. Where in the process can we interject the point to say, I need to track it here before it gets over here and I'm reacting to it. And so I look at what's the pain first. You know, if you look at a Pareto chart, your focus item and your descending chart, what are those areas for that pain that I need to look at from a company perspective, you know, looking at bigger targets, and then how does that cascade down to department level and even team level? You know, if we looked at our case, we had assembly. Ernie and I were in plastics and powertrain, which were feeder departments. Then within plastics, I was, you know, injection molding or instrument panel. Then I had team goals. So you could do that cascade up to say if the company needs a cost reduction, I can look at that at my granular level from an internal customer to the external and make those connections.
Very nice.
Just one more quick thing before we leave this slide is we always need to be able to allow standards to be changed, but we need to allow them to be changed at the lowest level possible. So every standard change that shouldn't have to go to the president.
Great point.
And so many times when we see people that they want to make change, and they say, well, it takes 3 months to make a change. That won't work.
Right.
So we have to have a process that's suitable and approved at the right levels of organization, and everything shouldn't have to go to the most senior person. Matter of fact, they should see very few.
Yeah.
Yeah, if the catch ball is happening and the bottom down is creating and we're just throwing that up for approval to say, are we meeting expectation? It's much more fluid when it happens at the bottom. And as I talk about in the book, we don't want to sell, tell, and convince anybody doing the work to do anything. We need to engage and involve them in creating it. And we're just the servant leader supporting it. And what resources do you need to be effective at it? So that's I think crucial for leaders to understand. So as we talk about, you know, Ernie and I get a lot of questions and have for years. You know, what was it like to be in Toyota's culture? And you know, I'm never going to say it was a perfect culture. There's no perfect culture. There's no perfect company. You know, the things that Toyota did from a cultural perspective had to do with standardization and what we talked about. There was always a standard. We always understood what we needed to do. Everything was visualized, and for every minute, every hour of the day, we knew where we were in accordance to the standard. And so we came up with this equation, which is the meat and potatoes, as we say in Kentucky, of the book. We tried to replicate a Tracy and Ernie kind of internalization of how do you share a very dynamic infrastructure of culture and bring it down to say, here, you can do this in any organization. It really had nothing to do with cars or building, you know, vehicles or all the things that we did. It was how we think. And so with the equation, it allowed us, and I put in the visual, and I know a lot of people on LinkedIn that follow and connect with us have seen the visual. If not, hopefully it brings to life where the outside of the ring is what you see as the actual GTS equation. And then what we've done in the book is actually weave in the TBP, the Toyota Business Practices 8 steps. So you can kind of see in grasping the situation, go to see the GTS ones in the middle with the person with the eye, that I've got to go see everything. And that's one of the Toyota Way values is Genchi Genbutsu, which we couldn't say it, so we said get your boots on, but it really just meant, you know, let's go see. And so if you look at this process, it was our cultural kind of linear path of thought. You know, first we go see, we grasp the situation, and that's looking at from when you look in the inner ring where the 8 steps go around, it's all the foundation is plan, do, check, action there when you get to the 3rd level. So it's a stacked approach to kind of bring in such a dynamic culture that can transfer to healthcare, transfer to service industry. In anything that people do, this is a way to think through your value streams. We work probably more outside of manufacturing than inside. I'll say pre-virus. We haven't been anywhere. This is day 50, so we haven't been anywhere for a little bit. But when you look at the grasping the situation, that's framing the problem, getting the gap, how do we measure that gap, and then looking at getting to solution that's root cause, that's, getting beyond the symptom, thinking deeper, then getting into the GTS4, which is really setting the standard, going back to what Ernie said. We never operated without a standard, and there was accountability to that, and if it wasn't followed, there could be corrective action. And so there was high accountability, but the beauty of it, people, as we've said, they think, oh gosh, you're stifling my creativity. Actually, we embrace the fact that we knew the expectation every day. There's a beauty around knowing what's expected and being able to see gaps when they're there, just really quick. That's kind of really the foundation of 5S, is to see abnormality at a glance. And then that sets us up for, kind of sustaining and maintaining that standard, which then allows us to improve it and getting to that point to where we're going to raise the bar on ourselves. And at Toyota, we would call it purposely creating a gap, which a lot of folks say, what kind of crazy place did you work for that you're purposely making a problem when you don't have one? And that was really going back to our expectation. But we had to set ourselves up through this path of thinking. You just didn't go in and have a target and, oh, let's raise the bar, and you miss that stability of that standard, which takes us again back to, and I'll add to it now, the E4, everybody every day engaged, empowered in this process of thinking, which supports what we learned internally as the TBP. And in the book, we have a whole case study, A3, around quality circles, actually, and I actually did it at the plant. It's a real live A3 that I made kind of for the book to fit, and there's a coach walking through, a mentee going through the process of the 8 steps, so you kind of see how it's weighed. But that really, all that set us up for that equal sign there to be the DNA, and I say that's the discipline and accountability that a lot of cultures miss. That's the part that is so much of the key. Mr. Cho would always bring our competitors in, and people have heard this story. And a lot of the folks would say, why are you bringing those guys in here? They're seeing all of our secrets. Right. And he's like, really, the secret is invisible. They can't see the cultural aspect of people thinking on a every minute, every hour basis and visualizing gaps. That's what they can't see. They see the external of a system, but the internal of a thinker and a problem solver and a person that's visualizing every day on the boards. The team leaders are out there working. You always knew where you were. And so that DNA, this kind of helps support a linear path of thinking, and the visual hopefully allows you to see it all together there. So Ernie, anything to add before I switch over?
Just real quick, this formula is what we really started out calling it leadership standardized work, of how leaders should be able to look at the process and be able to understand there's a step at each level, and be able to support and develop and support the organization to be able to have the patience to do it correctly.
Yeah. That's a great point. There was a question that came in. It might back us up just a tad, but you mentioned leader standard work. You guys talked a lot about standard work. Quick question that came in from Francisco. How do I write a standard and avoid being too prescriptive so we don't create bureaucracy?
Yeah, so the standard should only include parts of the process we need to control. So we have to be really careful to not write non-value added stuff into the standard. Some standards can be really short if it's a small process, and then if you take a huge process, we may divide it into 3 or 4 standards.
Sure.
But we only put in it what we create value. So we would ask every step you write in the standard, you've got to say, what's the value of that step? Yeah, otherwise, again, like we talked about earlier, otherwise we'll make standards for everything and nobody will follow anything, because it really does make it so restrictive that people can't even perform the job. Pick up a screw with your right hand, put it in with your right hand, twist it 3 times. Some of those don't create value.
Sure.
You only want to be able to put into the standard what value or what part of the process we're trying to control, not all the extra stuff.
And you're wanting to look at, I look at a standard as the best known method at this moment that we have consensus and agreement. You know, these are all the folks doing the work, right? We got to get them, have agreement until we change it together. So if the folks that are doing the work, like let's say there's 10 people that rotate on this process and I have all 10 of those together, what's the most value-added step? Who has the best knacks? You know, it's like sharing tribal knowledge, sharing our best practice. And how can we create the best of the best to set the baseline to go into that, you know, sustainability, maintain, then improve, then we're improving it together. So if I feel like I've been a part of creating it, then you lose some of that. I call it pushing the standard versus pulling. You know, I'm pulling out what I need from the folks. I'm engaging with them. They're actually creating it. I'm just facilitating to ensure we're meeting KPIs, we're meeting the internal customer and what the external needs, and doing it in the most value-added way. But when they're a part of it and they're adding their value and their time and what they've learned over the years, you will find that, you know, there may be disagreements, but you work through that and you understand the why. But sometimes there's reluctancy to folks actually wanting to share their knacks because, oh, I want to hoard my information because I'm not special if I don't have that special knack where I can do this the fastest. And so we got to, again, that goes to purpose and understanding and Kaizen, that I'm not just an individual, I'm part of a team, and the team succeeds, we succeed as an organization, and we also fail as one. As Sakichi Toyota says, people are the most important asset of the organization and can be the determinant of the rise and fall. So we have to put that emphasis on the people that are doing the work, create that best known method that we have accountability to follow until we change it. I'm going to move this forward for you, Ernie.
Yeah, and just the last point on that subject is really be careful how many standards you try to develop at once. Mm. What we would encourage is do whatever the size of your company can work on, but don't try to do everything at once. Do the things that are critical, because think about, if I don't have a standard that I'm going to a standard, that's a culture change. And so do one or two right before you do a bunch wrong.
Right.
And so really want to reinforce that we do the right amount at a time and continue on developing people to be able to do it. So as we shift to this slide in GTS1, we talk about go to see and grasp the situation. And this is absolutely one of the biggest struggles that most companies have with us is they can tell us what the problem is, but when we push them on it, they can't show us what the problem is. And so we really do talk about going to the Gemba, going to see means that we've got to have a plan when we're going out. We're not just out walking around. We've got a plan of what are we going to look for. And then we got to look at some things when we're there, not just the fact of we're going to the floor. We got to be looking to start with, do we have a standard? And if we have a standard, is it documented? How do we know? How do we train to it? What are all the aspects? What is happening? And then the next point is what is happening versus what should be happening. And so as a leader, I've got to understand the differences of those two. Now, I can't just walk up and say, hey, Patrick, why are you not doing your job? You know, that people are not coming in and performing the way they are because they think this is the only way to do it, or they want to disrupt the company. They're actually trying to survive. Mm-hmm. And so we're giving them a broken process and expecting them to perform miracles. When we don't, we blame them.
Right.
And so what we go back and as leaders, when we go look and see what should be happening versus what is. And we always tell the people that we coach is, I want you to see the problem, but I also want you to see where does the problem come from and where does the problem go. It's more crucial than just that one aspect of right there. It has an aspect for the different ones. The next part is then we're going to ask you, how do you know it's a problem? Do you have KPIs? Do you have measures on it? Show me how it's a problem. Mm-hmm. And many times we'll hear, well, it comes up all the time. Well, that's a true reflection of professional firefighting if it keeps coming up all the time, right? So we're going to really push them to say, the process is controlling you at this point. We're asking you to get control of the process. So please get whatever KPI you need to be able to understand why is this process not stable after we develop the standard. And then we use that as the leading indicator for the lagging indicators that Tracy's going to talk about in the next slide. But I need to first understand how can that process perform before I can worry about what's our total output or what's our profit margin for the quarter. I need to understand why is this process not stable. Many times we talk, and this is one of the things that probably was really complex for me to learn at Toyota. It says if we control all the leading indicators, we don't have to worry about the lagging indicators.
Mm-hmm.
It's that simple.
Yeah.
So if we control the process indicators, we will meet our company goals and objectives, and many times overachieve that company goal and objective because of our leading indicators that we're tracking and controlling.
That makes sense.
So I believe this is, the last one before the end slide. So when we look at everything that we talked about, so how do leaders try to support any culture, an evolving culture, an improving culture, one that's starting, from everybody's in a different spot. And one of the things from a works-like communication class that I learned from Toyota is that just a simple change of words in that servant leadership model, instead of saying, hey, I've got 25 people working for me, I need to reverse that to say, hey, I work for you, and how can I help? And that was one of the things that Mr. Cho, our president, probably in the early 90s, he would always be down at the process. I mean, one day I looked up and Mr. Cho was literally standing right in front of me as I was taking some glove box doors out of a press, and I turn around and he's right there. And he's like, how's it going today, Tracy-san? And, my voice is shaking because, I'm like, oh, what have I done? Why is he here? And he's like, how's this machine running? It's a newer machine. I want to understand. Is there anything that you need to make this process better? And I'm still reeling from the president standing right in front of me. But you found out later this was a very common practice. He would always come down and get a finger on the pulse of what can I do? He would never direct us or tell us to do anything. It was always through questions. How can I help? What resources do you need right now to be more successful? And I always thought that was such a model for a president who, was learning English at the same time, but just to come down and not, sometimes you'll see companies say, well, when my leadership's on the floor, it's because we're doing something wrong, or there's the 5 who's in the root blame. And it's not about how can I help or, what's the situation happening. So I always thought very highly of Mr. Cho and always tried to be like him as a leader as I grew, to say, let's just ask those simple questions. How can I help, and what resources do I need, and what are those barriers and constraints that I can remove? And another aspect of, if he didn't know the answer, it was like, and it's the third bullet on there, it's okay. I learned very quickly, it's okay as a leader to not have all the answers. I think a person respects you more and gains trust if you can look at them and say, I don't know, but how about we go see and learn it together? And I would rather be told that somebody didn't know than to give me some off-the-cuff answer and then I'll get back with you later and then I never hear anything. But to have the, just the being humble to say, I don't know, let's go see together. And Mr. Cho was that way as well. He was very much about sharing wisdom and let's learn together. And, if we can empower people through, for us, it was quality circles, it was suggestion systems, it was quality task force, safety task force. It was however we can get people to have that space to think and also space to listen. Our leaders had to listen, but just to listen, get the finger on the pulse, as I say, to allow that empowering engagement at the team member level and to embrace that they are our most important assets. Because our trainers in the early days, and we were developed after they left to be leaders that ask questions instead of, I can go to a person, or if I'm talking to Ernie, I can say, Ernie, why did you do that? That infers that, and Ernie may take that as that's inferring he did something wrong, versus, Ernie, do you mind taking a moment and helping me understand this process? I know your time is valuable. Can you walk me through this process? That's a much different question than why did you do, and just say, hey, do you mind taking the time to walk me through the process? I'm going to learn the process either way, but I'm going to have him much more engaged with me if I ask and reverse that I and you question. And that was something that we learned in our team leader curriculum. That was our hourly leader, just to reverse that you and I question. And, the last part there about discovery learning, I don't know how many times our trainers would set us up sometimes to fail. And sometimes it was just because we were arguing with them, and they just said, okay, please go, please document, please come back, we will have discussion. But there was this go back to space to think. They gave us space to think, space to fail, in a way that we could internalize it and have that self-discovery. I thought that was, to give us time to learn and time to reflect. The Hansei part, to reflect on that, was, I think, just priceless. And going to the end point, I think we've talked a little bit about it, but in the context of just as a culture, if I'm 80-20 or 90-10 on leading versus lagging, just think about how if I just shift that from 50-50, and then start to even move that. We want to try to really shift that. You'll always have a lagging, how am I doing at the end of the quarter type indicator. But if I can be more predictive up front, it gives me the ability to affect the lagging before I get that report at the end of the quarter. I'm having influence before I get it. Because if I react on April 30th on something that happened in January, I have no idea what happened in that process. I'm guessing, I'm assuming, tribal knowledge is telling me, or here's my favorite. I've seen this before, Patrick. Here's what we need to do. And my first response is, how many times have we seen this before? And so I think from a leadership perspective, to be able to step out and see some of these things, and, we're going through this really fast. This is a lot of information, but we cover a lot of it in the book, and just how we learned this and the trials and tribulations around it. Marty, I don't know if you have any last things to add on this part of it.
A couple things.
We're winding down.
The one thing when we talked about going to the Gemba, and I forgot to bring it up when my slide was up, but if leaders go to the Gemba and they think they see what's happening when they're not there, that's unbelievable. The reality is people are trying to perform what they think the leader wants to see.
Right.
And so it's what we call seeing through the process. You've got to be able to see what's happening when you're not there. And that takes really time and skill to be able to have the patience to be able to see that.
Right.
And so we have to do that. And the last point I'll make is talking about developing leaders. When I was promoted in powertrain to manager, my trainer would sit around when I'd make a decision. He would ask me, Ernie, son, why did you do that? And I would give him the response, and then he would just walk off. And so for a long time, it really buffaloed me. Why is he doing that? And so after some period of time, I asked him, I said, so why do you keep asking me these questions? And he says, I'm always gauging your capability level. Your response you give me tells me where you're at as far as your capability level. So I thought that was a pretty insightful way to be able to, he was never was he responsive and saying, well, you shouldn't do that. He was always gauging that at that level. So I thought that was pretty cool.
That is cool. Powerful. Well, we had a couple more questions come in, and we have a few more minutes. You guys want to hit a couple of these questions?
Sure.
All right. So we had one question come in that said, you were talking a little bit about problem solving towards the beginning. Someone wanted to know, how do you explain the difference between problem solving and preventative actions? So being preventative to keep problems from happening, or responding to problems, and what's the difference between?
Yeah. So preventative actions would typically say we've got a standard and we're measuring something that tells us we need to make change. Problems usually come from we either don't have the right standard or not following the standard, or it's not been updated in so long that we've created another environment that creates a problem.
Sure.
And so the big difference to me is I can do preventive. I can already see I need to make change. That's the beauty about having the standard and having the KPI to be able to tell me when change is necessary instead of waiting until something breaks down and I've got a problem. So that's a very good question, though. Very, very good question.
Yeah, the change point management part around that is we try to equip team members to understand, not just in the I'll just say the high level written standardized work, but when you look at equipment, capability of equipment, or how many of X do we need in our line side e-stock, being able to look at all the decision factors in what it takes for me to be successful, the change point management aspect, so the team member understands. The less questions they have to ask a team leader, there's a 1 to 5 pitch that one team leader takes care of 5 people down the line. So when they're equipped with being able to self-answer and know when I get to this level, X needs to happen, I can control that, I can do that, and to know, I'm on a minimum Kanban on X, and I'm going to need, 3 more drill bits to come in to maximize my content. It's things like that to be able to know and have all the factors in and creating that standard and, containing an issue, because the standard should tell you right away when I'm not meeting an expectation. And then we have that's initial problem awareness. Then we go into, okay, where's our gap? Then we go into how we measuring, it from a measurability standpoint. And then you go into breaking down to the contributing factors of it when you get into the problem solving side.
Yeah, just to add really quick, really the culture should be that problems are great. We love problems. And the more problems we can find gives us more ways to control before our customer sees our product. So it's really a culture of we love problems. We want to bring problems up. And if we don't have problems, that's the biggest problem of all.
Right.
Your as Ono told us.
Absolutely.
Right. Another question that came in, we're talking about KPIs, was around intangible targets. And, how do you set KPIs for stuff like measuring morale or character, honesty, things like that?
And so you have to be able to look at, okay, if we look at morale, for an example, what are the factors that go into morale? And so those are the KPIs we start measuring. And I'll give you a really quick example of that. If you look at absenteeism, you look at the suggestions coming out of that group, you look at voluntary activity, you look at corrective actions, and I can almost take some formula of those 4 or 5, and I can look at any place in the organization and I can tell you where we have issues with morale. As a matter of fact, we had that. And we have what we call our finger on the pulse to be able to always be looking at the data. And we can tell you before we have a team member come up and complain, or before we have a team member call the hotline, or whatever avenue it was, which we highly encourage, by the way, because it helps us see gaps. Mm-hmm. But we can always look at those things to be able to tell that before it happens. Now, morale is a kind of a funny thing because a lot of things can change it really quickly, right? And so if we kind of look at what are the contributing factors to that morale, good or bad, and we measure both of those, we can be able to predict that.
Right.
And we'll be able to advance that actually in the way. And many times it tells you when we've got a bad work environment, but it also tells you sometimes when we got a bad leader.
Right.
And attrition, I know a lot of companies deal with attrition. And so, your absenteeism leads to the attrition. So you can see all the things that if I'm not happy, and, Ernie and I, a lot of people have seen us do this either on video or at conferences. We talk about the wrinkled sheet of paper versus a clean sheet of paper. And I don't have one right here with me. I wasn't prepared to do it, but people have seen we have a clean sheet of paper, and that's a person coming in ready to go in the organization. They've gone through the hiring process. they're eager, they're ready. And through time, you know, as we go through, the culture may be different than what they thought, or their leader may not engage with them, and we slowly bring that person, you know, down to a different enthusiasm.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll always ask two questions, you know, do you believe your company has the best interest at heart for you? And then do you have the best interest of the company at heart? And when you have differing aspects of that, we've wrinkled that sheet of paper. And when you always try to take a wrinkled sheet of paper and undo it, those wrinkles are always going to be there. And people say, oh, well, they were just a bad seed and they weren't a good fit. Mm. And from a HR perspective, I'm going to ask deeper questions. I don't think we brought them in that way. What did we do from a cultural perspective, from a leadership perspective, to not allow this person to excel? And were we not living our values? Right. And they seen them on the wall when they came in, but they're seeing something else. So there's, you know, there can be aspects of morale when we as a company are creating some of these things around attrition, attendance, corrective action, not engaging, not volunteering for the things that we want them to think with. But if we don't give them the space to think, they're not going to try too many more times, right? They're going to shut down.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Great way to close our presentation today. So for anybody that's, and I know we weren't able to get to all the answers or all the questions, I apologize, but for anybody that's looking to learn more, obviously we only have an hour, and that's not nearly enough time for all the amazing experiences and learnings that we could gain from the two of you. How can people access your book, or how do they contact you if they want to reach out?
Yeah, so, you know, a lot of folks I saw on there, we've met on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn's a great way. I try to engage on there daily and post something. I'm a sharer of wisdom. I share a lot of things. I made a hashtag. If you want to go back to see everything, and it goes back pretty far, the hashtag sketched wisdom on LinkedIn. Okay. If you just want to follow that, you can see everything. I think I'm the only one that uses that. You can see everything I've posted, and a lot of stuff we've talked about here, we've actually posted things under that hashtag. But both of us are on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter a little bit, so Tracy_Son for Twitter. We've got the Toyota EE website, and then what I would say for the book, Amazon, you know, is the easiest. I think Barnes and Nobles has a site, but Amazon is, I think, a little more global. You can order it directly. I think right now it changes daily, but I think it's about 31% off, maybe 32. And then, of course, our email. So things that maybe that we didn't get to answer, I wouldn't suggest LinkedIn email because that scrolls really fast with other things. So I sometimes miss folks. I know some of you probably emailed me on the LinkedIn email, and it's not that I don't answer, it's I just lose it because that scrolls so fast. And so if there's something that we can try to answer for you in a way that we can write it, or, you know, a post or something on one of the old threads that you want to answer to, feel free to do that. But this gives you, from a social perspective, how to get a hold of us, and we hope to do more of these. And you know, just especially during this time as we're all kind of reopening our businesses and our worlds out there, I think the e-learning part's still going to be a big part of that. So we look forward to bringing more resources to that platform.
Right. And I did have a bunch of questions come in about the slides or the recording for this. It's all available on our Lean Solutions community site. So you can watch this. It's also, we're live on Facebook too, so it's out there on Facebook. The other thing, next week, so you guys will all get an email after this webinar with a link to register for next week's webinar with Panos Efsta. He's going to be talking about building intentional curiosity. So I'm excited about that. Please register for that. And thank you so much, Tracy and Ernie. We really appreciate your time, and just what an amazing presentation. Lots of great experiences. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate everybody.
Absolutely.
Yes, thanks for having us, Patrick.
All right. Take care.
See you guys.
See ya.